Hello, it's time again for another Man in Gray book review. Today's book is actually a play. It's Moonlight and Magnolias by Ron Hutchinson, which was staged originally in Chicago in 2004 and published in book form by Oberon Books in 2007. It's 108 pages. Moonlight and Magnolia is a comedy drama based on a true incident. In 1939, film producer David Selznick was 3 weeks into filming Gone with the Wind, but he was increasingly unhappy with Sidney Howard's screenplay and with George Cukor's sluggish direction. So he did the unthinkable. He shut down the production, sent all the actors and crew people home. This, of course, was the most expensive film ever made up to that time. You just shut down the production. And he fired the director, George Cukor, and replaced him with another director, Victor Flemming, even though Flemming was right in the middle of filming The Wizard of Oz. So he pulls him off The Wizard of Oz. And then to rewrite Howard's script, he brings in another screenwriter named Ben Hecht, who was famous for two things, for writing really good scripts and for working really fast. The only problem was Ben Hecht had never read the book, Gone with the Wind, and he didn't really know what the story was about. And so what happens is that Selznick locks Hecht, Flemming, and himself in an office, and they spend 5 days together frantically rewriting the script for Gone with the Wind, because every day the production was shut down. It was costing Selznick thousands and thousands of dollars in lost time. And of course, the rumors were going around that Gone with the Wind was going to be stopped and it wasn't going to be finished. And so he was trying to stop all that. And so this play imagines what happened during those 5 days when Hecht and Flemming and Selznick were rewriting the script for Gone with the Wind. So it's kind of the story behind the movie. And it's a comedy drama. The three characters, the three main characters in this play, of course, all were prima donnas in their own way. Selznick was a notorious micromanager. One of the running gags here, the only female character in the play is his secretary, Miss Poppingold, and he's constantly calling her to come in and do something. He wants them to only eat bananas and peanuts because he thinks that anything else will make them sluggish and sleepy. And so she's constantly having to bring in bananas, and he becomes obsessed with the shape of the ice cubes during the Civil War. Were they cubes or were they crushed ice? What kind of ice did they have? And so he makes a memo about that. And we learn as the play goes along that poor Miss Poppingold also is stuck there at the studio because she's got to run interference and make sure nobody gets into the office and interrupts them. And she also keeps Hecht and Flemming from trying to sneak out. And so she also kind of deteriorates as the play goes along. Of course, a lot of the humor comes from the fact that as the play progresses, these characters get increasingly exhausted from being up hour after hour trying to write this script. And as they act it out, you realize just how ridiculous the plot of Gone with the Wind is. There's all these characters. The starlet goes back and forth from Atlanta to Tara, constantly going back and forth to Tara. None of it makes any real sense when you start looking at it logically, the whole plot. And Selznick said, this is a melodrama. It's a melodrama. It's not supposed to make sense. It's supposed to be dramatic and over the top. Now, I said this was a comedy drama, and there are some very serious parts to it. The main drama comes involves the conflict between David Selznick and Ben Hecht. They're both Jewish, but they came from opposite ends of the political spectrum. Ben Hecht was a liberal. He was very concerned about the war in Europe and what was happening to the Jews there. He founded a charity to help raise money and evacuate Jews from Europe. Of course, remember, in 1939, the United States was still a neutral country. The war was going on in Europe. The vast majority of Americans did not want to be involved in the war, and they didn't want a whole bunch of Jews coming over. So they were having to fight immigration officials to get Jews into the country to escape from Europe. And so he's trying to do that, and he wanted to use the megaphone of Hollywood to push an anti-fascist agenda. He presently knew that eventually we were going to get involved in the war and that we needed to prepare the American people for this. Selznick, on the other hand, was a conservative Republican who wanted to downplay his own Jewishness and wanted to make movies that would appeal to a broad audience, make money, and not offend anybody. And so they butt heads through this play. Flemming was the non-Jew of the trio, And he was also a right-wing conservative, and his main fear was that this movie would bomb and ruin his career. Because when a movie fails, usually it's the director who gets blamed, not the producer, not the writer, not even the actors. It's usually the director's fault. And so he was terrified that the whole thing was going to destroy his career. And of course, Selznick had mortgaged everything he owned to produce this film, and so he knew that if it bombed, it would wipe him out financially. He was also married to the daughter of Louis B. Mayer, the owner of MGM Studio, the big studio in Hollywood, and he had a deal. Selznick had a deal with his father-in-law to distribute Gone with the Wind. So he knew that if the whole thing bombed, it would damage not only his career but also his father-in-law and probably destroy his marriage. So they were all under a lot of pressure. Now, the whole thing dramatically comes to a head about two-thirds of the way through the play when they reach the scene where Scarlett O'Hara slaps Prissy, her young slave. She comes back without a doctor and says she doesn't know how to birth babies. And that's a real famous scene where Scarlett slaps Prissy. Hecht doesn't want to write that scene. In fact, he thinks it's so offensive that he's already upset over the whole idea of Scarlett O'Hara as the heroine, because he sees her as a terrible, character, one with loose morals, is conniving, it doesn't have any redeeming features at all. And now she's slapping a slave girl, and he doesn't want to write that scene. But Selznick realized that scene was key to the movie, that it was a key dramatic point of the movie, and it would really grab audiences, and so he doesn't want to cut the scene. And so they get into a long argument about this scene. And in the end, they kind of work out a compromise. Flemming suggests shooting it in such a way that it's not as violent looking. And basically, they reach this kind of uneasy compromise. Hecht agrees to write the scene. And in return, Selznick makes a contribution to Hecht's charity, reluctantly. So they work that out. And of course, in the end, they finally finish the script. They're all exhausted, and poor Miss Poppingale is worn out too. Their clothes are all disheveled, and they're exhausted, and they can just barely function. But they did get the script done. And at the end of the play, of course, part of the whole humor of this is we know what happened in the end, right? Gone with the Wind, the script did get finished. The production did go on. Flemming did direct the film, although ironically, this is something the play doesn't mention. Right at the end of the film, Selznick replaced Flemming as director because he was so exhausted he just couldn't continue, and brought in another director, Sam Wood. So Gone with the Wind actually had 3 different directors during its long production. And another irony is that Flemming, who was afraid this would wreck his career, won the Oscar for Best Director. So even though there were 3 directors, Flemming was the only one who got screen credit, and he's the one that picked up the Oscar, not Cukor or Wood. And another irony is that Gone with the Wind won the Screenplay Award, the Best Adapted Screenplay, but Hecht didn't win it because Hecht was not given screen credit either. The screen credit went to Sidney Howard, the guy who wrote the original script, even though his script was heavily rewritten by Hecht and by several other people. He also brought in a few other people after Hecht finished the script to doctor it a little bit. He was constantly tinkering with the script. The production of Gone with the Wind didn't actually finish until a month before it premiered in Atlanta. I mean, they cut it as close as you possibly could. He actually filmed the opening scene. Selznick filmed the opening scene to Gone with the Wind 5 different times because he was so dissatisfied with it. And the last scene, Vivien Leigh had already gone back to London, and he had her fly back. And remember, there's a war going on. He had her fly back to Los Angeles and reshoot the opening scene again. That's how obsessive he was about trying to get this movie exactly the way he wanted to. And so Sidney Howard won the screenplay Oscar, but ironically also, Howard was dead by this time. Howard was a part-time farmer. When he wasn't writing scripts, he was out on a farm. And a few months before the film premiered, he was starting up a tractor. The tractors back then had these old-fashioned tractors, had a hand crank. You had to crank it like the old cars. And he was hand cranking his tractor when the tractor suddenly started up and ran over him and killed him. So he died before he realized that he'd won an Oscar for a script that was mostly the work of Ben Hecht. So there's lots of ironies in Gone with the Wind. If you know the backstory of it, the play becomes even more funny. And another thing, of course, is Nowadays, we look at Gone with the Wind quite differently than audiences did in 1939. Gone with the Wind was the most successful film in history if you go by ticket sales. It was far more popular than Avatar or any of the Marvel movies or any of those movies. Whenever you see a list of the biggest selling, biggest grossing movies of all time, Gone with the Wind's not on the list. But that's because in 1939 tickets were like 50 cents or something. So if you adjust for inflation and you go by ticket sales, Gone with the Wind is far and away the most popular movie of all time worldwide. There's no question, not anything close to it. But just as Hecht says in the play, there's a lot of problems with this film. Margaret Mitchell was a Southerner. The movie does promote the idea of the lost cause myth, the idea that Southerners weren't fighting to maintain slavery. They were fighting for their heritage and their freedom, and which is a belief that a lot of white supremacists still promote. Every time there's a controversy over taking down a Confederate statue, you hear this argument that, these guys weren't really slave owners. They weren't really fighting for slavery. And so Hecht makes that argument, and he's also, so this is a real serious question. But again, there's another irony here because this is a film that promotes, the Old South and antebellum slavery. But Hattie McDaniel, a black actress who played a maid in the film, was the first black actor, period, to win an Oscar back in 1940. In the 1940 Oscar, she was the first person of color to win an Oscar. So this film that has all these problematic things broke ground for black actors in Hollywood. And Butterfly McQueen, who played Prissy, the character in Prissy, kind of stole every scene she was in, and that really boosted her career well. So ironically, this film, actually did a lot to help black actors in Hollywood. But the overall message was the one the NAACP was very much against this film. So, in any case, that's the idea. If you enjoy old Hollywood movies, and you like, kind of farcical comedy dramas, you'll really enjoy reading this. If you ever get a chance to see this play, it's a play that's put on quite frequently by amateur groups, and so because it's a very popular audience play. If you're a big fan of old movies, you'll really enjoy reading this play. The book is Moonlight and Magnolias. The author is Ron Hutchinson. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.